The cruelest twist. The girl who tried to save a life became the loose thread that could destroy the whole family. Emma thought the worst part was finding Ethan half dead in an alley. Wrong. The worst part came after she saved him because now she knows too much. She met the father. She heard the son's secret. She walked into the house. And somewhere inside that empire, a traitor realizes one random waitress might expose everything. That's the genius of this setup. Emma has no power on paper, but the moment dangerous men don't know what she knows, she becomes the most dangerous person in the room.
And so it begins, with the call piercing the quiet dark. A man is bleeding out in an alley just off 5th Street. This call triggers a hidden emergency line, a ghost within the system. After her report, a 3-second silence hangs in the air, a testament to a woman forged from something different. That voice is Emma Turner's, 28 years old, exhaustion etched onto her face as she kneels beside him in her uniform. Her instructions were absolute. No police, do not make contact, and above all, conceal his location. Anyone else would sever the connection. She did not, and this is the precise moment we are drawn into the city's shadowed veins. Let's try to understand this impossible decision. Emma's cardinal rule was a firm refusal to engage with strangers in dark alleys. This wasn't born of indifference, but from a profound, almost painful empathy. Yet 12 years in a high-stakes job had honed a razor-sharp intuition for danger. She could distinguish peril from pure catastrophe. Her instincts were her gospel. But this man on the pavement? He was a different kind of storm, a force powerful enough to make her shatter her own sacred code. He lies face down on the damp concrete, one arm flung wide as if to ward off a final terrible blow. But what truly paralyzes her is an utterly incongruous detail. His suit is dark, exquisitely tailored, a phantom of wealth in this alley of refuse. She could recognize affluence from a mile off, even when steeped in chaos. "Hey," she whispers, her approach cautious. Her shift had ended 11 minutes ago. Her world consisted of $16 and a container of soup for her dinner. She had no idea that life was now a memory. "Hey, are you with me?" Nothing. She kneels, her fingers searching for a pulse, a muscle memory from when she was 12 and watched her father collapse. It was her first searing lesson in utter powerlessness. She finds it, a pulse, faint and erratic, but it's there. "Okay," she exhales, forcing her own lungs to work. "Okay, you're alive." Rolling him gently, she sees it, a deep, blossoming stain of crimson saturating his shirt. Her stomach lurches. This was no mere accident. This was an act of brutal intent. "I have to call," she murmurs, phone in hand, but a deeper, more primal instinct seizes control. That intuition she lives by. Her gaze darts from the blood to the impossibly fine fabric of his suit. Her eyes sweep the alley. It's unnervingly clean, as if the scene had been scrubbed. She aborts the emergency call. Instead, her hand slips into his jacket, seeking a wallet, a name, any thread to follow. The wallet is heavy. She flips it open, and a driver's license stares back. Ethan Sullivan, age 34. The address is for a gilded, distant neighborhood. The cash compartments are empty, but from behind the license, a single business card slips out and flutters to the ground. There is no name, no company logo, only a telephone number in Boston gold foil. Beneath it, 4 stark words, "For emergencies only." Call. Emma's gaze lifts from the card to the bleeding man. She retrieves it. She dials. The line rings precisely twice. A voice answers. "Who is this?" It isn't a query, it's a command laced with a chilling, absolute control. It sounded like a magistrate about to deliver a verdict. "My name is Emma Turner," she says, amazed her voice holds firm. "I'm a waitress at Murphy's Diner on 5th. I've found a man unconscious in the alley." His license identifies him as Ethan Sullivan. This number was with him. I was unsure what to do. There's so much blood and I— Stop! The single word severs her sentence. How long since you made contact? 3, possibly 4 minutes. Describe his condition. She swallows against a rising sickness. It's— Her palm presses against his side, feeling the slick warmth through the fabric. It's severe. He requires a hospital. He will not be transported to a hospital. The voice remains a flat, cold line. You will not dial 911. You will not attempt to move him. A beat of silence. Remain at your location. Do not speak to anyone until my team is present. Is that understood? Every single instinct in Emma's body began to scream. One does not command another to evade the police unless the police are the very danger to be feared. One does not have teams on call at 3 a.m. for any wholesome purpose. All of her internal warnings are blaring in a deafening chorus. She remains on the line. Is that understood, Miss Turner? Yes, she responds, perfectly. 4 minutes. Then came the detail that would be seared into her memory. He did not disconnect. The line stayed open. He was listening, his quiet breathing a form of auditory surveillance, a weaponization of silence itself. Emma knelt in the chill, listening to a stranger's breath, and she waited. At the 1 minute and 40-second mark, Ethan Sullivan awakens. It happens instantly, bypassing any grogginess. It is the awakening of a man trained to never betray a moment's weakness. His eyes snap open, assessing the entire scene before his body has even registered the pain. His gaze finds Emma, locking onto her with a palpable intensity. Don't move, she says, her voice a low, steady anchor. You're hurt. I've called for help. Who? He rasps, the word punctuated by a cough. Who did you call? The number on your card. The transformation in his expression was absolute. All confusion vanished, replaced by an emotion she could not decipher. It was a chilling combination of cold logic, stark terror, and a profound resignation. A look that gave her the first true glimpse into the abyss of her night. His hand shot out, his grip a manacle of steel around her wrist. How long ago, he demands. 2 minutes, perhaps less. Was it him or one of his people? He answered himself. Ethan's eyes squeezed shut, his jaw tightening into a knot of muscle. He was bracing for a terrible, inescapable fate she couldn't yet comprehend. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Now listen to me with absolute focus. I'm listening. In approximately 2 minutes, vehicles will arrive. You will witness men do things that will unsettle you. His eyes opened again, pinning her with their intensity. You will show them nothing. No fear, do you understand me? Who are they? Can you do what I am asking? Yes or no? Emma held his gaze. 12 years of navigating human chaos had taught her one indispensable art. It was composure, the ability to harbor terror within, while projecting a surface of unbreakable calm. Yes, she said. He offered a slight nod, his features softening with something that looked like sorrow. I am sorry you were the one to find me. She had no time to respond before 3 black SUVs without license plates slid into the alley with practiced, tactical silence. The maneuver was clearly well rehearsed. Large, silent men emerged, their actions so economical that wasted motion seemed a foreign concept. They converged on Ethan, ignoring her entirely, evaluating his state with a clinical detachment while speaking in a clipped shorthand that was lost on her. One of them finally glanced at her, his expression a perfect void. Step away, he ordered. She complied. A 4th, larger vehicle then appeared. Its passenger carried a different kind of authority. He possessed a center of gravity that pulled everyone else into his orbit. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and a dark, heavy overcoat. His gaze fell upon Ethan, then swept the alley. In that single, unguarded moment before the mask of control fell back into place, Emma saw it, the raw, unvarnished terror of a father. Then the emotion was gone, and Vincent Sullivan walked toward his son. Ethan. He knelt, a hand touching his son's face in a gesture so fleeting and intimate that Emma felt compelled to look away, as if she were intruding upon a sacred, private grief. "I'm fine," Ethan managed. "You are not fine." Vincent rose and pivoted, his eyes finding Emma as if he had known she would be there all along, as if he knew the precise flagstone on which she would be standing. He approached her. Emma had faced down intimidating men before, belligerent drunks and predators at her diner. She understood how to maintain her ground. She maintained it now. "You are the woman from the phone," he said. It was a statement, not a query. Yes, Emma Turner. He already knew. He had known her name the instant she'd spoken it. Yes, sir. Vincent Sullivan appraised her the way one inspects a contract for a hidden clause, searching for any sign of weakness. She did not avert her gaze. Ethan's warning screamed in her mind as her eyes met Vincent's. What did he say to you when he regained consciousness? Vincent's question sliced through the tension. The interrogation had begun. She had the span of a single, frantic heartbeat to construct a reality. He asked if I was all right, she said. He was disoriented, as though his memory of the event was fractured. For 4 agonizing seconds, Vincent's stare bore into her, a classic exertion of power. Each second landed with a physical weight. Is that everything? He asked. That is everything. A long silence stretched between them, and then the faintest trace of an unknown emotion flickered across his face. His gaze held no warmth, no approval, only a cold, methodical evaluation. It was the look of a master deceiver who had just been told a lie he could utilize. For Emma, it was impossible to know which was the more dangerous truth. You made the correct choice, and my son is alive for it, Vincent stated, his voice resonant. In all the ways that are important, he added after a pause. That is a fact I will not forget. The words escaped her before she could contain them, a pure instinct overriding caution. I was not trying to be remembered. It was a reflex born of raw honesty, from a soul incapable of playing the game. A shadow of something she couldn't name crossed Vincent Sullivan's expression, there and gone in an instant. No, he conceded, his voice slow. I imagine you were not. He turned, and his voice broke the quiet with a series of commands. His team moved with an unnerving efficiency, transferring Ethan to a gurney and into a long black SUV. The entire scene was dismantled in under 3 minutes. Emma remained motionless, a phantom in the alley, her expression a careful blank. As he entered his vehicle, Vincent looked back. Go home, Miss Turner. We will be in contact. She forced her legs to move, resisting the urge to sprint. She walked 6 blocks, climbed the stairs to her apartment, and sank into a chair, still wearing her coat. The clock on the wall. The microwave display read 2:49 a.m. An eternity seemed to have passed in the last 32 minutes. She was unmoored, drifting between awareness and emotion when her phone vibrated on the table. An unlisted number, a single hard beat of her heart against her ribs, and then she answered. Miss Turner, Vincent Sullivan, on a secure line. At this hour, I needed to confirm your return. A deep chill spread through her. How did you know I was here? a beat of silence. The circumstances made it probable. Her gaze swept the street below, deceptively calm beneath the amber streetlights. After a long moment, she stated, "I'm home." Good. A crushing silence filled the space between them. "When my son recovers, he will wish to express his gratitude. I trust you will permit it." Every cell in her body screamed, "No," urging her to sever this connection now. Her survival instinct was a deafening siren. "Of course," was the answer she heard herself give, the classic surrender of a trapped creature. "Good." The pause that followed felt longer, more deliberate. "Miss Turner, a final matter." "Yes." "Regarding what you told me of Ethan's words, I accepted your account." She offered no reply. "It is vital you know my acceptance," he continued. "Was a conscious choice. Do you grasp my meaning?" In her cold apartment, Emma sat like a figure carved from stone, her hands clenched into fists. She grasped it all. The unspoken message was a thunderclap. He knew she had lied, and he had intentionally let it stand. His choice was a pure assertion of dominance, a move that now bound her to him with an uninvited debt. "I understand," she exhaled. "Good night, Miss Turner." "Good night, Mr. Sullivan." For a long time afterward, she did not move. A drink on the table went from cool to cold. Food was a foreign concept. The city outside hummed its familiar song while, in a parallel world she'd just entered, the man she'd pulled from the brink was being reassembled. She turned her hands over in her lap, viewing them as if they belonged to a stranger. These were the hands that had located a pulse on an unknown man's neck, that had held a business card with a gilded number. They had applied pressure to a wound while a voice commanded stillness and silence. She considered the quiet life she had so carefully constructed, and she knew in the 3 a.m. quiet of her kitchen that it was now demolished. The question that held sleep at bay was not what she had done, but what was coming for her. An answer she sensed was already on its way. The next morning, she went to work. What was the alternative? To stay home and obsess over a man whose voice was a shard of glass lodged in her mind? For 11 years, Emma Turner had never missed a rent payment. Her strategy for survival was simple. She appeared, so she appeared. At 6:45 in the morning, Murphy's Diner held the scent of burnt coffee and the fragile hope found only before 7 a.m., before the day has a chance to sour. Emma tied her apron, refilled the carafes, and constructed a mental wall against the thought of Vincent Sullivan. She would banish the alley from her thoughts, and Ethan's hand closing on her wrist, his voice from the darkness. "I'm sorry it had to be you." Her mind became a fortress, focused solely on the order for table 4 and a faulty fryer. This powerful emotional defense lasted until 9:17. That is when the black sedan appeared. It did not park, but merely stopped at the curb, perfectly centered in the window, where she stood holding a coffee pot and a counterfeit smile. It waited, its windows like polished onyx, and Emma poured coffee for Mr. Delgato while every alarm in her soul silently shrieked. "Sweetheart, you are pouring too much," Mr. Delgado observed quietly. She halted the flow. "My apologies, Mr. Delgado." When she looked back, the car had vanished. It was nothing, she told herself. Just another dark car with tinted windows in a city full of them. Vehicles stop outside diners all the time. She recited the logical excuses, one by one, and believed none of them. At 11:40, her phone buzzed. Unknown. Her stomach plunged. She moved to the back hallway. into the smell of bleach and old grease and answered, "Miss Turner." The voice was not Vincent's. This one was younger, smoother, with a politeness that was entirely fabricated. "My name is Daniel. I am with the Sullivan family. Mr. Sullivan has scheduled a meeting for this afternoon." "This afternoon?" she echoed, the words feeling hollow. "Correct. Mr. Ethan Sullivan wishes to speak with you at the arrangement of Mr. Vincent Sullivan." "My shift ends at 3, Emma replied flatly. A brief pause. "Excellent. 4 o'clock is ideal. A car will be sent to the diner." "A car is not necessary. I can just—" "A vehicle will be at the diner," Daniel repeated, the pleasant tone now reinforced by the finality of a closing tomb. "We shall expect you at 3, Miss Turner." The line disconnected. In the rear hallway of Murphy's, Emma stared at her phone. The only rational course was to return to her duties. The luxury of a private panic was not available. At 2:55, as she refilled napkin dispensers, the door chimed. The man who entered was a severe disruption to the diner's dull scenery. It was more than the flawless suit or the aura of a man who creates his own atmosphere. It was his eyes. Dark and swift, they surveyed the room before locking onto her with the cold precision of a weapons targeting system. "Miss Turner," he said, "I am early. I trust that is not an inconvenience." This was not the man from the phone. This was Ethan Sullivan, rebooted, and a universe away from the broken man in the alley. He projected a power that felt as if it could bend the very air around him. "You look considerably more," she started, "upright than our last encounter." "Yes," he replied, a faint smile on his lips. He simply stood there, a silent requisition for a portion of her time. In a sudden flash, she saw herself as he must see her, the food-stained apron, the diner's scent clinging to her, a pen behind her ear, a smudge of grease on her arm. She was completely unprepared, completely out of her league. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, her voice an order, not a request. Turning from him, she informed her manager of a family emergency in a steady tone. In the back, she splashed water on her face, meeting her own gaze in a cracked mirror for 10 seconds, gathering the fractured pieces of her composure. To her reflection, she whispered, "You're fine," a lie that her own eyes refused to accept. The mantra, "You're fine, he is just a man," was a flimsy defense against his immense presence. When she returned, Ethan was waiting with coffee he had procured during her 5-minute retreat. He rose as she approached, an old-fashioned courtesy that felt like an electric shock. "You did not have to come in person," she remarked. "I am aware," he said, his gaze capturing hers. In the diner's dim light, she could see the topography of his trauma, the exhaustion etched around his eyes and a jaw set against pain. "I rarely do things I am not required to," he stated, making it clear this visit was an intentional act. Emma slid into the booth, attempting to level the ground between them and to quiet the trembling of her hands. Her question, "How bad was it?" was answered with a detached summary of his wounds. 2 broken ribs, a gash requiring 22 stitches. He conceded it had looked bad, and she confirmed she had thought him dead. This shared proximity to death was the reason for his visit. "It is why I am here," he explained. In half an hour, she had both saved his life and lied to his father, a sequence of events he felt demanded a face-to-face meeting. He placed the word "lied" on the table between them, completely unvarnished. He understood precisely what she had done and its implications. She tried to soften it, recasting it as an omission. "I merely omitted the complete details." In Ethan's world, such a distinction was meaningless. He then revealed his knowledge, showing he had already discerned her motives, making her explanation irrelevant. The only sign of his own tension was his hands shifting on the mug. He had assessed her correctly, a woman who acts decisively and maintains her nerve under duress. He was, it turned out, astounded by her coolness during the assault, by her capacity to analyze the chaos when anyone else would have succumbed to panic. She credited it to 12 years of crisis management. She told him, "I have had practice." And he replied, "So have I," alluding to his own violent history. In the quiet that followed, there was a clear, unspoken understanding. Then she asked if the attack was random, though she already knew the answer. She just needed him to confirm it. He offered a single word: no. It was a targeted attack. He finally understood that the attackers had exploited a covert protocol, a trap activated by that exact phone number. His expression grew cold, now holding a new kind of respect. "You pieced that together," he said. It was not a question. She explained her reasoning. He had asked when she called, not if, which proved the call was the trigger. The ambush, she had concluded, was a lure for either his father or himself. Both possibilities meant a traitor was in their midst, someone with inside knowledge. Across the table, Ethan Sullivan lowered his mug, his face an unreadable slate. "You are not what I anticipated," he admitted, likely having expected a distraught victim. "Oh, I'm terrified," Emma countered, her voice as solid as stone. "I am a professional at being afraid. I just refuse to show it on my face while I'm speaking to you." Her complete authority over her own fear finally shattered his composure. His hardened facade cracked, and for a brief second, she saw the true man beneath, the one forged by his family's blood and business. For a flash, she saw the real Ethan Sullivan, and then he lets the grenade roll across the table. "My father is requesting another meeting." In that instant, her entire world grinds to a halt. "A formal one, at our residence tonight." He dismisses their first encounter as a mere field assessment, not a true summons. This, he implies, is the actual trial, veiled as a courtesy, but designed as a deep psychological excavation. Ethan selects his words with a surgeon's precision. "He finds it necessary to understand you." The ambient noise of the diner dissolves. "Understand me," Emma echoes, the syllables feeling like lead on her tongue. Ethan simply nods. "You are now aware of certain things. My father must ascertain the character of the person who would make such a call." Her eyes scan her ordinary world. The hiss of the espresso machine, the faded menus, the familiar faces, a reality now fractured in two by his presence. She tests the bars of her new cage. "And if my answer is no?" Ethan's reply is delivered with a calm, brutal simplicity. "You have the right to refuse. But I cannot deceive you. There would be repercussions." If she declines, his father will simply populate the void with his own grim assumptions. That alone would ensure a severe response. "So it's an illusion of choice," she states, seeing the final moves on the board. "There is always a choice," Ethan corrects. "My family merely specializes in removing most of them from consideration." The stark honesty of it draws a genuine laugh from her, a sound that seems to startle him. Finally grasping the full scope of the game, she concedes. "All right, what time?" 7 o'clock. A vehicle will be dispatched." It is then he discloses he came alone, that this clandestine pre-meeting is unknown to his father. A flicker of tension crosses his face, a minute signal that he's putting his own life on the line. He is unaware you came to me first, Emma observes. That is correct. When she presses for his reasoning, his gaze locks onto hers. Because it was imperative that I speak with you before he did. He pauses, the next words costing him. So, regardless of his questions tonight, you may tell him the truth of my words in the alley. I will manage the consequences. It is an astounding tactical sacrifice. You want me to tell him the truth? She asks, completely stunned. I want you to be free of the burden of lying for my sake, he clarifies. Her mind races, dismantling and rebuilding her entire perception of him. He was offering her the truth as a shield, liberating her from a deception she had constructed to protect him. Why does this matter so much to you? She presses. I am familiar with the price of keeping secrets for my family, he replies. He concludes their talk by rising and leaving an absurd sum of money for his coffee, preempting any argument. I did not want that wait to begin for you because of me, he says, turning to leave. Her sharp voice stops him at the door. Mr. Sullivan, she asks the one question that has been an unspoken presence between them. What was it you said in the alley? The part you don't wish for your father to know? The diner itself seems to hold its breath. From the doorway, Ethan's eyes find hers, and he speaks for her alone. I said I was uncertain of who was responsible, but that I had a strong suspicion. A heavy pause hangs in the air. And I said I believed it was an inside job. With that, he was gone, leaving her with the immense gravity of his secret. She now possessed the knowledge of a traitor within a lethal criminal empire. Everything began in an alley where Ethan Sullivan was bleeding from a wound dealt by a man he once called brother. His father, the formidable Vincent, was oblivious that his own son had already identified the serpent in their midst. That toxic information was then passed to Emma Turner, a waitress earning $6 an hour. Her reaction was a study in composure. She completed her duties, wiped her tables, and waited. The black sedan arrived at 6:55. She never looked at the license plate, knowing it was an untraceable detail. Stepping inside was her decision, and Emma Turner is not a woman who glances back. This profound calm always followed a silent internal battle with what-ifs. Inside the car, she watched her familiar neighborhood dissolve into a realm of wealth and influence, crossing a threshold from which there was no return. Ethan's comment about his family limiting the options resonated differently now. A chillingly accurate description of a world designed for entrapment. She saw the web she was caught in, all spun from a single phone call. The destination, however, was not the ostentatious mansion she had envisioned. The residence was an elegant brownstone, its understated grace broadcasting a history of immense power, a flawless veneer of normalcy. A kindly older woman with a grandmotherly air opened the door. Her name was Rosa, and her greeting felt just a little too polished, too perfected. As Emma stepped across the threshold, the heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound severing her connection to her former life. At that instant, at 6:58 on a Tuesday, Emma understood her existence had been split into before and whatever was to come. With a composed and deliberate pace, she followed the attendant. The woman, Rosa, glided with a fluidity that made her seem an organic part of the home. Emma's professional eye caught an architectural inconsistency. The interior was vastly larger than its exterior suggested. This was a deliberate psychological play, engineered to disorient a visitor and convey a single, potent message. Nothing here is as it appears. Rosa pauses before a set of massive double doors, raps twice, and gives Turner a smile that is a masterful, unsettling contradiction of warmth and emptiness. After declining a drink, Turner was left in the enveloping quiet. She drew one slow, steadying breath to conquer her fight-or-flight instinct, then opened the doors herself. It was a minuscule act of agency in a place where she possessed none. Vincent Sullivan was positioned at a window with his back to her, a pose of absolute authority that required her to cross his domain on his terms. The weighted silence that followed was a demonstration of power, a clear, unspoken statement that he was the center of this world. When he finally pivoted, he was far more composed than the man in the alley. She filed away the observation. That was the raw element. This was the refined, finished weapon, a terrifying feat of self-mastery. Only his eyes remained as they were in the alley, ceaselessly scanning and assessing her. The arrangement of the chairs, with no desk as a barrier, was a strategic ploy, a fabricated intimacy meant to lower her defenses. He opened not with an inquiry, but with a statement of fact, a move to show her he held every card. Emma blinked, understanding that his son had already reported her initial refusal of the car. "My son, in time, reveals most things to me," Vincent states, his tone flat. The phrase, "in time," held a dark implication of his methods. He then instructed her to recount her conversation with Ethan. Her mind reeled, balancing Ethan's plea for truth against the immediate danger she was in. She chose her words as if stepping across a floor of broken glass. "He said thank you," she began. "He mentioned his injury and this meeting, and he asked that I convey to you the truth of what he said in the alley." The room fell into a weaponized silence, an instrument Vincent Sullivan wielded like a scalpel. "He did," he affirmed, less a question than a final judgment. "He said he was aware someone was listening. He believed it was someone on the inside," Emma conveyed, her voice shifting to a professional, de-escalating register. It was a vocal shield, creating distance between herself and the explosive device she had just activated. For 6 entire seconds, Vincent was a man carved from stone, dialing the psychological torment to its peak. Then he moved to the window, turning his back to obscure his reaction to the confirmed betrayal. She was watching a fissure form in the bedrock of a man's world. "He told you this?" he asked the window pane. "A woman he met 4 hours ago." "I believe he told me because I was a woman he met 4 hours ago," Emma countered, her logic flawless. "I am a waitress. I have no stake in your affairs. Telling me has no consequence in your hierarchy." He wheeled around, his face a mask of regal shock, as if hearing a hard truth from a commoner his own circle was too cowardly to utter. "There's more to you than meets the eye," he remarked. "I am precisely as I appear," she countered, deflecting his judgment. "You're the one who attached a deeper meaning." Her candor coaxed out a fleeting, genuine smile, a glimmer of pure respect. That flicker of esteem she sensed was entirely authentic. He resettled in his chair, the atmosphere shifting from a cross-examination to a quiet exploration. "Tell me your story," he requested, the simple curiosity in his tone disarming her. "There isn't much of a story to tell." "The most interesting people often claim that," he replied, beginning to probe. Her world had been the Ziner for 12 years, since she was just 16. "My mother became ill. We required the funds." She recounted her personal history like a clinical report. Father left at age 8, mother passed 4 years ago. "It is just me." To Vincent, this was not a tale of sorrow, but a tactical profile. When he inquired why she was in the alley, she called it routine. It's my shortcut home. I have walked it 1,000 times. And you stopped. I stopped. I don't know why. I just did. In a final move of absolute control, Vincent claimed authority over her own instincts, declaring, I do. Emma did not waver. In his calculus, she lacked the cold-blooded instinct for survival, a conclusion he delivered with clinical detachment. She acknowledged this quality had been a problem for her before. He then artfully twisted her compassion, converting it into a form of debt by linking it to his son's survival. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The phrase, my son's life, was not a statement. It was a shackle, locking her into an obligation. Her first question was for an update on his son's condition. Anger, Vincent noted, and in his world, that was a victory. Pain was Ethan's retreat, but rage was the fire that proved he was still fighting. An unreadable current moved across his features. He will recover. He then caught her muted whisper, I'm glad. Yes, she affirmed. With that, Vincent allowed his formidable frame to sag, a performance of profound exhaustion, shifting from untouchable sovereign to weary father, a gambit to lower her guard. The weariness seemed to seep from his very marrow. His question was unvarnished. What did she intend to do with what she now knew? Her answer was an unequivocal rejection, a desperate attempt to pull back into her own life. She wanted no payment, no favors, no part in their future. Her role was concluded. She would not be a piece on his board. Vincent replied with a silence that held the weight of an accusation, making the quiet a tool of pressure. Only the ticking of a clock marked time in the still room. He offered her a cage of inverted logic. Her vehement denial was precisely the move a cunning operative would make. I can't prove a negative, Emma responded, seeing the jaws of his reasoning close. He then made a show of choosing to believe her, a classic feint of alliance before delivering an unavoidable truth. Her intentions, he explained, were now meaningless. She was in the game, whether she chose to play or not. The understanding was total. A sudden, icy understanding washed over her. She did not hear a threat in his words, but a simple declaration of fact. She began to catalog the evidence against her, foreknowledge of the assault, her presence in his private sanctum, a clandestine meeting with the target. In the calculus of Vincent Sullivan's world, such facts dwarfed motive. Others, lacking his reason to pause, would draw their own fatal conclusions. I'm a loose thread, she murmured, realizing an enemy could pull on it first. Vincent's expression was an unreadable mask. You are not what I expected, he observed, an echo of his son that revealed their shared, inflexible worldview. And what was that? She inquired. She admitted she had anticipated an offer of money and had already war-gamed the conflict between her principles and her poverty. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And which side would have prevailed? Likely both, she confessed with a stark, unvarnished honesty. I am efficient, she added. Vincent rose, and the atmosphere in the room crystallized. I am not offering you money, he said. I am offering you something else. He summoned Rosa, who materialized with silent swiftness. His hushed exchange with her was a calculated performance, an invisible barrier that solidified Emma's position as an outsider under his unquestionable dominion. Rosa offered a single sharp nod and was gone. Vincent's focus snapped back to Emma. I want you to have this number, my private line. He instructed her to call if she saw anything remotely out of the ordinary, a command designed to cultivate paranoia. Do you believe I am in danger? She asked. I believe, Vincent said with a cold precision, that I would prefer you be able to reach me in 30 seconds and not need to, than the reverse. In that exact instant, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. The truth landed on Emma with immediate certainty. Ethan had known of a meeting, but not with her. His mind was visibly struggling to connect the disparate facts. You told him, Ethan accused. You commanded me to, she countered. An entire novel of accusation and defense passed between father and son in the ensuing silence. Who do you suspect it was? Vincent's question landed with the impact of a physical blow. The barest hesitation before Ethan spoke was the only answer needed. He was calculating which truths were permissible to share. Not in her presence, Ethan said, a look intended to erase Emma from the room. She stays, Vincent commanded. She is a civilian, Ethan retorted. She ceased being a civilian the moment she used my number, Vincent declared, cementing Emma's unwilling allegiance. He held his son's gaze. She stays. Emma witnessed the battle of wills fought in absolute stillness, a world where silence was a weapon and every second was a negotiation. She met Ethan's glare without apology for an order she didn't give. Caruso? Ethan finally let the name drop like a stone, weighing its sound in front of an outsider. Vincent then illuminated the landscape of Caruso's recent power plays. You told me to wait. Ethan's voice was laced with fury. I grew tired of waiting. I made a move last week without authorization, he admitted, the wound in his side a testament to his defiance. You made a move? Vincent repeated, the words laden with immense weight. Without my consent. Yes. The silence that descended was heavy with 34 years of shared history. This had moved far beyond matters of business. Why? Vincent asked, the quiet word landing like a devastating blow. Because I knew you would forbid it, Ethan answered. The expression on Vincent's face was not anger, but the profound sorrow of a king who learns his heir sees his wisdom as an obstacle. It was the agony of a man forced to confront a reality he had assiduously avoided. You believed, Vincent stated, that Caruso had a man on the inside. Ethan's lack of denial was his confession. Vincent turned away, his posture ramrod straight as he began the painful work of redrawing his entire world. For how long? He asked. 4 months, Ethan replied. The number settled on Vincent's shoulders like a tangible burden, a measure of his son's solitary secret campaign. And you told me nothing. I had no proof, Ethan countered sharply. Just a pattern, a feeling, and a blade between my ribs. His voice fractured. I didn't want to be wrong, Dad. The use of that title was a strategic shift in identity, from soldier to son, a plea for understanding over judgment. The change was not lost on Emma. Vincent turned back, his face a fusion of absolute authority and paternal love, a combination she now recognized as his natural state of being. Following a long moment appraising his son, his gaze locked onto Emma. Miss Turner, I owe you a formal apology. She could only blink. For what? For the circumstances in which you are now ensnared? His stare was unflinching. You sought a simple resolution and instead found a variable whose threat I cannot guarantee until I understand its full design, he paused. For this, I am accountable. It is not the proper recompense for a selfless act. Emma looked at Vincent Sullivan and finally saw the man Ethan had described in the diner. Look, I never wanted to involve you because of my mother. The two men, enemies a moment before, found common ground, shielding the civilian trapped between them. Keep your apology, Emma countered. We can decide who is sorry when it's done. Vincent simply stared. We, he repeated softly. She absorbed the gravity of that single word and held her ground. Yes, we, she affirmed. And with that, in a silent mansion, a waitress redefined the battlefield as the city slept, unaware. Her 11 years of staying invisible had just gone up in smoke. A memory flared. A shadowed man, the feel of an expensive card. The thought surfaced. Sometimes the most perilous detours lead to uncharted territory. It was followed by another, and perhaps that is all right. She departed the Sullivan residence at 9:47 and was back at Murphy's diner by 6:15 the following morning, assuming the drab costume of Emma Turner. She was a woman who survived chaos by anchoring herself in the ordinary because a landlord is indifferent to a mob war. But the rules had shifted and she was beginning to see the cracks in her reality. The black sedan of yesterday was now silver. A newer model, different registration, parked slightly farther down the block. It was there at the start of her shift and remained during her break. By her 1100 hours check-in, another vehicle entirely had assumed the post. Had Vincent Sullivan not sensitized her to the threat, she would have been utterly unaware. But she was not. She also knew better than to report it. To call in a threat she could manage would signal that she was losing her composure, and unraveling was a form of surrender she refused to entertain. She filed away the information, she adhered to her routine, she observed. At 1300 hours, a man occupied a stool at her counter, requested a coffee, and left a $20 bill for a $7 tab without meeting her eyes. Emma refilled his mug twice with professional detachment. Noting his tactical position, back to the wall, a clear view of the entrance, the unmistakable discipline for managing public threats. After he disappeared without a sound, she discovered a folded note beneath his cup, with a fluid motion one might use to clear away crumbs. She palmed the note and slipped it into her apron. Unread, she proceeded to table 6, topped up the condiment shakers, and only then did she retreat into the quiet of the service hall. 4 words written in a stark, disciplined script issued a chilling directive. Don't go home tonight. For precisely 10 seconds, Emma remained a statue in that corridor. Then, folding the note into a perfect square, she walked back onto the floor, where 4 tables waited, and the lunch rush was an audience before whom she would not betray her fear. At 1400 hours, she placed a call to Vincent from the walk-in freezer, the single location with no chance of being overheard, a space that smelled of cold steel and secrets. He answered immediately. The note, she said, foregoing any preamble. Was it from you? A thick silence stretched across the line. No. A knot of cold dread twisted low in her gut. A man left a note. It says, "Don't go home tonight." Describe him. She provided a flawless report, his physical build, his seat at the counter, the 20 for a $7 coffee. She could faintly hear Vincent relaying her intelligence to someone else on his end of the line. The response came through the line, sharp and swift. Emma! That single word, her name spoken by him for the very first time, landed like a tremor in the quiet diner. Confirm your location at the diner. Her reply was clipped. Affirmative. My shift concludes at 1500 hours. You will not be leaving then. Remain indoors until an operative makes contact. A pause hung in the air. You will not accompany anyone who fails to use the passcode November. Do you acknowledge? November, she echoed back, her voice tight. Understood. Do not allow fear to make you careless. I'm not careless, she bit back before the truth surfaced. I am frightened, but I am still operational. A sound came from his end, something like a short, impressed exhale. Operational is all that matters. Remain where you are. And so, she did. She moved through the empty diner like a ghost, polishing coffee machines that already gleamed, refilling napkin dispensers that were already brimming. When her manager's concerned voice broke the silence, she offered the thin excuse of a draining week. Darling, it is Wednesday, the woman noted gently. Emma's response was hollow. I know. At 3:22, the bell above the door chimed and Ethan entered. The reality of him was a shock to her system. She had braced herself for some hulking shadow from the alley. A silent professional with a password and a running car. She was in no way prepared for Ethan Sullivan, who looked to be fueled by 4 hours of sleep and a deep, simmering rage. November, he stated, his voice slicing through the haze of her thoughts. That is the word, she confirmed. He told her they had to leave, that his father had promised backup, but he'd never specified it would be him. He had decided to come himself. He gestured for her to lead the way. Emma, we need to go. And for the second time in as many days, she tore away the apron, the worn uniform of a life that was no longer hers. She fed her manager some hollow tale of a family emergency, earning a look that conveyed profound doubt at how quickly her world was unraveling. Outside, a car idled, its engine a low thrum in the afternoon air. It was an older, unremarkable sedan designed for anonymity. And of course, Ethan was behind the wheel. She threw herself into the passenger seat, the world outside smearing into a blur before the door had even fully clicked shut. Who delivered the note? She pressed him. The sender is a ghost for now. His gaze was a frantic dance, flicking to the mirrors with a paranoid cadence she was beginning to recognize as his natural state. But the courier you described, the precision, the skill, that is the work of a professional, a phantom delivering a warning, which means they are aware I was at the alley. It does. And this is to frighten me. This is to erase you, Ethan corrected, his tone devoid of emotion. There is a vast difference. Frightened people cry out. Erased people simply fall silent. His eyes found hers. Someone is clearing the board before my father can find the rot within our own house. You are a loose thread. You understood the stakes. You said almost those exact words to me yesterday. Because it was the truth then, and it is more so now. He executed a lane change, a movement both fluid and severe. After you departed, my father began his own quiet inquiries. He is hunting for the traitor in our ranks who is feeding intelligence to Caruso, and now that traitor feels the ground shifting beneath him. They don't know the specifics, only that I'm connected. You were a catalyst, your report from the alley. It forced our enemy's hand. He glanced at her then. It was the correct move. You have to know that. But the consequence is that our time has officially run out. And when your enemy grows desperate, they become sloppy, which is how I received the note, Emma deduced aloud. She stared down at her own hands lying perfectly still in her lap. An image of her apartment bloomed in her mind. The worn sofa, the soft glow of the clock, the window that overlooked an ordinary street. She pictured the quiet existence she had meticulously assembled, now just another casualty in the wreckage of the last 36 hours. Where are you taking me? She finally asked. To a secure location while my father manages the next 12 hours. He paused. I am sorry. You never asked for any of this. You apologize frequently. I have much to be sorry for. Don't, she commanded. I made my own choices. Do not diminish them with your guilt. He glanced at her again, the look lasting far longer than a simple check of the mirror, stretching into a beat of quiet communion. When his eyes returned to the road, he looked like a man surfacing from some deep, turbulent thought. The journey took 20 minutes. The dense city streets dissolved behind them, only to reform into something else. A new neighborhood, a different frequency. Still alive with people, but with a hushed quality. The sort of place where daily life follows an unspoken, memorized script. Ethan parked the car, led her up the steps of a pristine brownstone, produced a key from his coat, and held the heavy door open for her. Is this your residence? She asked. It is mine, he confirmed, the words drawing a sharp line between this space and formal family compound. The distinction between this apartment and the Sullivan estate was immediate and stark. It was not a matter of wealth. The place was well appointed. It was the atmosphere. His family's house felt like a museum. This was a stronghold. Books were stacked horizontally atop other volumes. A single used coffee mug rested on a table. His coat was thrown over the back of a chair in a way no house staff would ever permit. And to her own astonishment, a strange and utterly inconvenient sense of security began to settle over her. Ethan gestured toward the living area as he moved to the kitchen. Are you hungry? I should warn you, my abilities in the kitchen are an offense to civilization. She was running on nothing but adrenaline and replied, I'm fine. But a sharp pang from her stomach betrayed the lie. On second thought, I'll have whatever you can make. She could hear him moving about, the low hum of the refrigerator, the sharp click of a stove burner. Sinking onto the sofa, she finally allowed the facade to crumble. With her head thrown back and eyes shut, she drew 3 slow, deep breaths, trying to command the panic to recede. Are you holding up? Ethan's voice came from the kitchen. Yes, just talk. About anything but this. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling. Tell me something that isn't our reality right now. For a moment, the only reply was the sizzle of a pan. Then he spoke. I wanted to be an architect. She lifted her head from the cushion. Truly? Yes, until I was 19. I had a mind for it, for the mathematics and the logic. I was drawn to the idea of creating something permanent. A beat of silence. Then my grandfather fell ill. My father required my help, and that entire dream dissolved. Do you regret it? At times. The honesty was so unvarnished and sudden, it struck her with unexpected force. Do you ever see a remarkable building and just wonder what if? I do, but I extinguished the thought quickly. He was now leaning against the kitchen doorway. What about you? What was your dream? She simply looked at him. An eternity had passed since anyone had posed that question. That part of her had perished around the age of 16, along with any aspiration that wasn't tied to simple survival. A teacher, she said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. For elementary school, when I was 12, I would hold a pretend class for the neighborhood children in my living room. She paused, a memory ghosting across her face. My mother would just watch and smile, not in mockery, but she just loved how earnest I was about it. A flicker of unguarded warmth softened Ethan's entire expression. So what stopped you? He asked. The same thing that stopped you, she stated plainly. Life intervened. He held her gaze, and in that moment she saw the man beneath the layers of tactical armor. He was not the analyst, not the enforcer. He was someone else entirely. Without another word, he turned and went back into the kitchen. She let the moment pass. He returned 10 minutes later, bearing 2 bowls of pasta that, despite his self-deprecation, were surprisingly good. Simple, warm, real food. And she was utterly famished. She ate without ceremony, too exhausted for pretense. They sat in a silence that was, against all odds, comfortable. Damn it! Emma finally broke the quiet, setting her bowl aside. I need his name. Ethan mirrored the action. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and the posture was so unnervingly like his father's it sent a chill through her. It was the Sullivan family stance for delivering grave news. Marco Caruso controls the East Side. He has for nearly 8 years. He and my father had an arrangement, territories, finances, the standard treaty between powers. For years, everything was balanced. Ethan's jaw hardened. Then my father began to withdraw. The elder Sullivan had relinquished 3 operations in the last year, and it was then that the fissures appeared. Caruso interpreted this not as a step toward retirement, but as a sign of weakness, a clear invitation to advance. The initial provocations were subtle, easily disavowed, but Ethan detected that underlying strategy. He knew it was a deliberate campaign, and so he responded, surgically removing an entire enemy unit from existence, leaving no trace. It was a silent declaration of where the true power resided. He stared at his hands, knowing he had erred in keeping it from his father. But Emma's voice cut through his private judgment. It was not merely about protection. It was an assertion of his own authority. His eyes snapped to hers. She had seen it perfectly. She laid it bare, not with the bluntness of an operative, but with the insight of a psychologist. It was a bid for independence, a gambit to prove he could function without his father's shadow. The silence that followed was charged, as if she had struck a deeply hidden nerve. Yes, Ethan finally conceded with a weary sigh. That was it. And a traitor within my own detail informed Caruso of my actions, which prompted his retaliation. That is the epicenter of this entire catastrophe. Who else is aware of this breach? My father's 2 most trusted men, Luca and Dom, were briefed last night. Ethan's voice became low and measured. One has been loyal for 22 years, the other for 15. And you trust them? They possess my father's trust, he evaded. I was asking about yours. Ethan met her gaze directly. I trust Luca. Dom is a different matter, but I have nothing more than instinct, and my father does not make decisions based on instinct. A brief pause. He requires proof. Emma completed the equation in her own mind. Attempting to extract proof from a man who knows he is under suspicion is an exercise in futility. Precisely! The meal was finished. The apartment was still. A car drove past on the street below, and she went rigid, holding her breath until the sound receded into the night. That note, she began, stay clear of your place tonight. If it didn't come from you, it came from Caruso, and that tells me they know my name. A cold, hard fact. Which means the rat in your house told Caruso I'm real. Another truth. So the source was aware I was on the estate, and that I met with your father alone. She let the implication linger, and now they're spooked by what we discussed. Ethan just observed her, his face a stone mask. So, explain it, he said. The traitor sees a power shift. They lack details, but they see this. An unknown woman finds you, is taken to the patriarch for a meeting and is then simply released. And just after, your father places a series of discreet calls. Her gaze locked with his. This isn't to frighten me because I'm a danger, it's to frighten me because my knowledge is a blank space to them, turning me into an unpredictable problem. The quiet in the apartment felt heavy enough to suffocate. You pieced that together, Ethan murmured, his voice low. In, 45 seconds? I had the entire day to think, she retorted. Plenty of quiet moments on my coffee runs. Emma, he said, tasting the name. What you've laid out isn't a problem. It's leverage. If the informant is acting out of fear, then what he imagines I know transforms me from a liability into a weapon. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. I understand what you're proposing. We need to inform my father. Make the call. Ethan took out his phone. It rang just twice before Vincent picked up and Ethan stated, "You are on speaker," setting the device on the table. It lay there like an unexploded ordnance. She has a working theory, Ethan began. Emma leaned forward, guiding Vincent through her reasoning precisely as she had for his son. A detached, methodical analysis. The warning note was merely a symptom. The core problem was the informant's growing panic and the power that could be drawn from the void between her actual knowledge and his fears. When she finished, the line went utterly still. You are suggesting, Vincent's voice finally cut through, we use this ambiguity as a lure. I'm suggesting the ambiguity is already in play, she corrected. He is already moving based on it. Our only decision is whether we react to him or we seize the initiative. Another strained silence followed. Dom, Ethan said to his father, his tone soft. Don't, Vincent interrupted sharply. Dad, Emma just gave you a flawless profile of an individual who knew she was present, knew of your calls right after, and had the ability to watch her diner by 1 p.m. That level of access is absolute. Luca doesn't have it, Dom does. The silence that emanated from the phone turned arctic. In the past 24 hours, Emma had learned to recognize the different textures of Vincent Sullivan's quiet, and this was the most terrible of all. It wasn't the silence of a strategist at work. It was the silence of a man staring into the chasm of an unthinkable betrayal. 22 years. For 22 years, Dom had been his most trusted man. I require proof, Vincent stated, his voice a flawless, rigid shield over a foundation of pure ruin. Emma had to turn her eyes from the phone, feeling as if she were witnessing a private moment of damnation. I know, Ethan replied. I'll get it. I have a strategy. The old man made his terms clear. He needed a coherent strategy, not another one of his son's lone wolf operations. This was a fundamental change in their rules of engagement. After a tense pause, Vincent issued a command that Emma instantly recognized as a seismic event in his bond with Ethan. He insisted on hearing the strategy beforehand. As Emma watched Ethan, she could see the fault line between the father and son widening in that very moment. The emotional fortress within Ethan Sullivan wasn't being breached. It was simply dissolving like a rampart that had lost its purpose. Emma is the strategy, Ethan declared. Emma went rigid. She is the single variable they cannot account for, he continued, his eyes fixed on hers. The entire gambit is to make them believe their little threat was successful. She will disappear, severing all contact with us. They won't ever consider her part of the play. To them, she is already catalogued as a nobody from Fifth Street. He paused, and Dom, of all people, will see right past her. It's how he views everyone outside his world. Vincent's voice sliced in. What is the precise maneuver? A chance encounter, Ethan replied. A completely unplanned meeting between Dom and Emma in a public place he would never perceive as dangerous. The objective is to corner him, forcing him to determine what she knows by himself. It is a test of allegiance, constructed to make him reveal his position by his reaction. Ethan then added, "She is a natural at this, Father. Your 60-minute discussion with her last night confirmed it." The line was completely silent for 15 seconds, then 20. Emma felt every tick of the clock, absorbing her new role as a critical component in a machine she never consented to activate. "Miss Turner," Vincent's voice crackled. "Are you there?" "I am. You are under no compulsion to do this." I state that in front of my son for clarity. A pause. "But I must ask you, what is your move?" Emma's thoughts flashed to the warning slip beneath her cup. She pictured the silver car that had been stationed opposite her diner. She considered a man in Vincent Sullivan's confidence for 22 years, who for 4 months had been leaking intel to the same people who nearly killed his son. She calculated the price of allowing that betrayal to fester. She thought of her mother, a woman who navigated life by sidestepping conflict, a master of silence. And then there was Emma, who was not made that way, who approaches a dying man in a dark alley, who speaks the unvarnished truth to a crime lord, and who, over the last 36 hours, had ceased to be invisible. "Provide me with the file on Dom," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She detected a subtle shift from Vincent's end, as if the air itself had thinned. A 61-year-old man, obsessed with control, a narcissist who believes he can decipher anyone. He treats restaurants as his office, rotating between the same 3. He holds a reservation at Carmine's on Thursday. "Thursday," Emma repeated. "That provides a 2-day time frame for preparation." "You are not required to do this," Ethan began. "I am fully aware of my obligations," she interrupted. Her gaze burned into his. "Do not treat me like some fragile thing on the verge of shattering. I have spent 12 years managing volatile men in confined situations. I am telling you, I can enter that restaurant and secure what you need." She paused. "What I require is all the intelligence you possess on him. His conversational habits, his ego, his triggers, his weaknesses, the complete psychological profile." She looked toward the phone. "I need that information from both of you." A quiet moment passed, then Ethan's voice, nearly a whisper, "Done." Vincent's followed, his tone shifting from calculating to something like forged iron, an absolute vow. "Done." Emma leaned back. Outside, the city carried on, completely unaware. Thursday was in 2 days. She had 48 hours to construct the ideal woman, a person a man like Dom would dismiss on sight, never suspecting the truth beneath the surface. For 12 years, she had gone unnoticed. It was time to learn the true power of being underestimated. For 2 days, time warped into a unique form of agony reserved for those awaiting conflict. On Wednesday, Emma moved through her shift like an automaton, giving a master class in feigned normalcy. Her actions were mechanical, a sequence of vacant smiles for patrons whose memory of her would vanish instantly. This was the precise image Dom and Caruso's people would anticipate. A frightened civilian who had received their warning and was now keeping her head down. But by night, her kitchen table transformed into a command center, with Ethan's voice a constant stream of data on a secure line. She analyzed Domenico Ferraro, deconstructing him as she did her work, through patterns, intuition, and the distinct vulnerabilities of his pride. At 61, Dom was a holdover from the Sullivan family's earlier era, a fixture so constant he had become part of the scenery. His caution was not born of fear, but of ingrained routine, a muscle memory developed from his proximity to power. He considered himself the syndicate's foremost judge of character, a fantasy Ethan's intelligence identified as his greatest vulnerability. His critical flaw was vanity. The man demanded public deference and dressed as if all was on display. He sought validation not from the younger members, but from sophisticated women who could recognize a man of his self-perceived importance. From the age of 16, 32-year-old Emma Turner had learned to weaponize the world's assumption that she was merely a tired, ordinary woman. She could build with chilling accuracy the precise facade a man like Dom would assess and dismiss in 30 seconds. "Your objective is not to extract information from him," Ethan's stark voice instructed her on Wednesday evening. "No direct inquiries. Simply occupy his space. Become an audience he wants to perform for. Allow him to be the one to fill the void." Men like Dom perceive a vacuum and feel an innate compulsion to dominate it with their own words. "And when the Sullivans are mentioned," Emma responded, knowing it was inevitable. "He will raise the topic," Ethan affirmed. "Display a little apprehension. Let him believe his men unsettled you more than you revealed." A moment passed. "Faking that emotion shouldn't be too difficult." "No," she concurred, "it won't be." "Emma," his tone changed. In 2 days, she had learned the nuances of Ethan Sullivan's voice like a chart. She recognized that drop in pressure signaled an approaching storm. This was no longer about the mission. It had become personal. "If anything feels wrong, you leave. No hesitation, no reconsidering. You just get up and walk out. Luca is present at the restaurant." "I am aware. You have told me 3 times. That makes 4. "Ethan, I will be all right." A beat of silence. "You need to rest. You sound utterly exhausted." His voice became a near inaudible murmur. "You are not obligated to see this through." "I know," she registered, the unspoken fourth warning. "Good night." Oblivion claimed her for 4 hours. She awoke at 5, staring into the pre-dawn gloom. In the stillness, she began her mental exercise for mastering fear. You meet its gaze. You gauge the true danger, not the long shadow it casts. The worst scenario, Dom sees through the deception. He's sharper than the profile suggests. Her identity is compromised. If so, she simply gets up and leaves. Luca is her extraction. Vincent will contain the aftermath. The best scenario, Dom becomes his own undoing. He rushes to occupy the silence she offers. That ego, honed by 22 years of being the sharpest mind beside the throne, makes a fatal slip and gives Vincent precisely what he needs. Between utter defeat and victory lay the span of a single conversation. Emma Turner had navigated high-stakes discussions since she was 12, always embodying a role. She was capable of this. She rose, brewed coffee, and armed herself for Thursday. Carmine's was a restaurant with a confident identity. Dark paneling, sharp white linens, and lighting engineered to make every patron feel they were cutting a clandestine deal. Emma entered at 12:45, a lone diner requesting a table by the window, and was seated immediately, cloaked in an armor of flawless self-assurance. The agent ordered sparkling water, her self-control absolute. She avoided sweeping the room, aware that searching for backup was an amateur's mistake that a predator like Dom would notice and exploit. At 1:05, her target arrived. Dom. The intelligence had been accurate. He was softer, fuller than Vincent, with silvered hair and a coat that whispered of its exorbitant price. He glided through the space with the unforced authority of its proprietor, greeting the staff by their first names and acknowledging another table. A display of influence she recognized was just as much a performance as her own. His act was so polished, she suspected he no longer recalled the man beneath the facade. He registered her presence before he was even seated. She felt his appraisal on her for less than a second. All the time, a man of his kind requires to assess and categorize someone. Her own gaze, fixed on the street beyond the glass, served as the lure. She timed it to the millisecond, allowing her focus to drift back to him, creating the flawless illusion of being startled. She gave him a brief, civil smile, the perfect disguise of a woman lost in her own world. He settles at his table with a pair of associates, but Emma barely registers them. She has finished her first course when Dom approaches, employing that rehearsed, frictionless voice. "I loathe to intrude," he begins, radiating charm. "But it seems you've been stood up." He offers a disarming smile. "Domeno Ferraro, I trust I'm not overstepping." She counters with only her first name, Emma. A deliberate move. "I'm not waiting. I'm thinking." He gestures to the vacant chair. "Would you mind if I joined you?" She lets him hang for a calculated moment before agreeing. It was the ideal pause, long enough to convey slight hesitation but also openness before she offered her consent. He occupied the seat, and a server instantly appeared. He placed his order without a look at the menu, a clear demonstration that he commanded this space. His inquiries seemed casual, painting him as some sophisticated, empathetic stranger, but it was all a carefully constructed front. She presented him with her tailored backstory, plausible because it was mostly true. A waitress weathering a difficult week. "Difficult how?" he pressed, his attention sharpening to a point. And there it was, the cold, precise machinery of espionage whirring to life just beneath the surface. "I had an encounter," she states, her tone perfectly even as she lowers her eyes to her drink, letting her expression carry the narrative. The subtle clenching of her jaw was flawlessly executed. "I met people I never expected to cross paths with, and I'm still processing it." "What sort of people?" His voice was light, feigning idle curiosity. "Powerful." Her gaze snapped directly to his. "The kind of power that is invisible until it has you completely trapped." Dom held her look, and she began to process his micro-expressions with analytical speed. He showed no shock, but his focus intensified, like a hunter zeroing in on its prey. "That sounds unsettling," he offered. "It was illuminating," she countered, letting the word linger between them. "I was convinced I understood how things operated. I was mistaken." A moment passed. "And now I am aware of far more than I'm comfortable with." 3 seconds of loaded silence. What Dom Ferraro did next served as a verbal confession she would later recount verbatim. An innocent man would have pressed for information. He instead just smiled, pivoted smoothly, and remarked, "Powerful people have many responsibilities. Often they are simply individuals who mastered one particular skill very early in life." He never once inquired about what she had learned. He did not ask for a single name. With the deftness he had perfected over 22 years, he expertly rerouted the conversation. In that instant, Ethan's hypothesis solidified into Emma's reality. She maintained the charade for another 20 minutes, performing the role of an unnerved woman out of her depth. She allowed Dom to steer the talk, providing him voids that he filled with his well-worn deflections, utterly convinced of his control. It was she who determined when the meeting concluded. She executed the handshake, the smile and the courteous farewells with practiced precision, a flawless performance concealing her true thoughts. Her heels tapped a sure rhythm on the sidewalk as she left Carmine's, and less than half a block on, Luca materialized beside her, matching her pace as if he had been there the entire time. "The vehicle is right around the corner," he said, his voice low. "I'm aware," she replied. Luca cast a sideways glance at her. "I was monitoring the exchange." She stopped short. "You had me wired." Mr. Sullivan required verification. She catalogued the information. Anger was a pointless indulgence. Then he is already informed. "He's waiting," Luca stated. "Both of them." The black sedan, the streaking city lights, the Sullivan estate, the stone stairs, the imposing front door. It was a familiar scene replaying itself. The door swung inward before they reached the top step. Rosa stood waiting. This time, Emma stepped over the threshold without a trace of hesitation. She had memorized the layout, and the dread of the door sealing behind her had vanished. Vincent and Ethan were already on their feet as she came in. The atmosphere was so charged, it felt palpable, confirming they had listened to the entire encounter live. The echo of her conversation at Carmine's still hung in the room. She sat down. They remained standing. "He never posed the question," she stated. "No," Vincent affirmed. "He did not. He diverted." He employed the identical evasive maneuver on 2 occasions, when she implied she possessed forbidden knowledge, and again at the mention of powerful men. Each time he wrenched the dialogue in a new direction, neutralizing its forward thrust. An innocent man seeks clarification. A guilty man changes the topic. "This is hardly conclusive proof," Vincent said, his voice sharp as steel. "No," Emma conceded. But it was as Ethan theorized, a test to establish either his innocence or his guilt. He made no effort to establish his innocence. The ensuing silence felt absolute. She observed Vincent Sullivan weighing 22 years of trust against a 40-minute exchange engineered by a waitress during a $30 lunch he had financed. She let the reality settle, understanding some truths must inflict a wound before they can be released. Across the room, Ethan's gaze met hers. A silent communication flowed between them, something far deeper than any words could convey. It was the shared recognition of 2 combatants on opposing fronts arriving at the same grim conclusion, accepting that their paths were destined to collide at this very point. "I need to place a call," Vincent declared. "You'll have to excuse me." He exited, the door closing with a gentle click, though not fully latching. Emma could hear his subdued, even tone in the hall, speaking a name she did not know. He repeated it once before the sound died away. Ethan moved across the room, occupying the chair his father had just vacated. At this proximity, she saw the profound weariness etched into the lines around his eyes, the consequence of 4 days under impossible strain. "You were correct about him underestimating me," Emma murmured. "I know." It was still infuriating, she confessed. "Even though it was the core of our strategy, even though I relied on it." She looked down at her hands. He looked straight through me and registered no threat at all. It took him maybe 20 seconds. "And you turned that to your advantage." "I did, but you have to appreciate the price." She lifted her eyes to his. "I have spent 12 years crafting the woman he was incapable of seeing. I was just beginning to believe that persona didn't have to define me forever." Ethan's expression was so unguarded, it was almost difficult to witness. "It doesn't," he said, his voice soft, "have to be." She held his gaze for another long moment. With a single sharp nod, she broke their connection, as if protecting something nascent and too fragile for inspection. Vincent reappeared, lingering at the threshold. For a fleeting instant, Emma glimpsed the father beneath the magnate, the human being inside the citadel of power. Then his bearing stiffened, the emotional barricade slamming back into position as he resumed his chair. "The matter is being addressed," he announced. Emma was wise enough not to probe for specifics. She understood that there were sections of this world she could enter, and others she could not. Dom Ferrara's destiny was firmly in the latter, a boundary she had no desire to test. "And Caruso?" Ethan inquired. "Caruso is a separate conflict for another time," Vincent answered, his gaze resting solely on his son. A new covenant was forged, absolute truth, with no more independent actions. Vincent allowed the quiet to linger, an emptiness heavy with 22 years of a fractured bond between father and son. Ethan accepted the conditions, his gaze locked with his father's. A palpable change swept the room, a tacit understanding that 4 days had reshaped their entire 34-year history. It was not repaired but remade, stronger in the places it had fractured. "I agree," Ethan affirmed. Vincent gave a slow nod before his focus shifted to Emma. "Miss Turner," he began, but the name hung in the air. His expression was that of a lifelong wordsmith suddenly rendered speechless, his vocabulary failing him. "I find myself lacking the proper words," he eventually conceded, "for all that you've accomplished this week, for every decision, every action you took from the moment in that alley." Emma started to protest. "Do not diminish it," he interjected softly. "Allow me this." She fell silent. "You stepped into a conflict that was never yours. You then navigated it with flawless instinct under unimaginable strain, with no training, driven by nothing more than an inability to witness suffering." He paused, letting the weight settle. "You used deception to shield my son. You carried the truth to my very door, and today you triumphed in a mental battle that men in my circle spend lifetimes preparing for. You solved this with merely 48 hours of information, wielding the silent strength of a person perpetually misjudged, who learned to turn that into a weapon." His voice was deep, measured, and saturated with reverence. "I am in your debt. That is not a sentiment. It is a statement of fact." Emma paused as his words settled deep within her. A memory surfaced, her mother observing her manage the neighborhood children. Another ghost appeared, being 16 in a sterile, cold space, followed by 12 years of constant motion, a strategy to outrun the shrinking confines of her existence. Her thoughts flashed through the critical moments. A glimmer of gold in the shadows, the warmth of a life under her fingertips, the decision to dial a number. "I require one thing," she stated. Vincent's attention was absolute. "Name it." "When this is concluded, all of it, Caruso, Dom, everything that follows, I must have your assurance that it is completely and truly over." She drew a steadying breath. "I will not spend my days glancing back, waiting for the silver car to appear." "You have my vow," Vincent returned instantly. "There was no delay, no consideration. It was the pledge of a man who knew some obligations transcend money." She acknowledged with a nod, rose, and took her bag. Her gaze found Ethan's, and in it she recognized the same unguarded expression from his apartment. It was a glimpse past the fortifications around his heart, a view she suspected few had been granted in a long, long time. "Next Thursday," he offered. Her head tilted with a quiet inquiry. I thought I might stop by the diner for coffee. His eyes stayed on hers, and that small, authentic smile returned. If that would be all right with you. Emma Turner regarded Ethan Sullivan, the man whose life she had saved in an alley only 4 days prior, a man from a universe entirely separate from her own. She reflected on how architects pivot to new roles, how educators become servers, and how a life can be violently rerouted onto an unforeseen path. Thursday, she affirmed, I will keep a place for you. She walked down the hallway where his associate, Rosa, stood by the exit. Outside, the engine was already humming. The city remained itself, vast, indifferent, teeming with millions of solitary journeys. None are designed to intersect, yet each is a single misstep from collision. She slipped into the vehicle. The familiar scenery of her world began to drift by. Her street, her apartment block, the small fissure in the plaster she had intended to mention for 3 months. The local shop where her usual was known. Every last detail was precisely as she had left it, unaltered, yet the terrain of her inner world had been raised and remade. There was no name for what she was becoming, and the lack of a label was acceptable. She now understood that uncertainty was not the same as being without direction. It could be the quiet moment before sketching a new chart, the sensation of a life expanding beyond the words you know. She exited the car, she ascended the steps, she entered the familiar quiet of her home. She stood in the ordinary light of a life that had continued without her, yet was now on a profoundly different course. She hung her coat, she brewed coffee, she sat at her table, her hands open, and studied them once more with the lingering questions. What purpose were these hands meant to serve? What is the meaning of it all? What is a woman like me supposed to do? And for the first time in 12 years, an answer finally came. She had intervened. She had moved through the inferno. She dialed the number. She stood her ground. She had met the gaze of Vincent Sullivan, delivered the truth, and would not retreat. She walked toward the peril and emerged with her spirit whole and a piercing clarity that at 32, her existence had not been a rehearsal for serving coffee. It had been a preparation for this. The coffee was ready. She filled a cup. She sat in the ordinary silence of her ordinary life, a life that was now forever changed. She did not grieve for what was gone, nor did she dread what was to come. Emma Turner had reconciled with many things in her time. This was not an armistice with destiny. It was a new existence she would defend with every breath. A broader world, a more profound truth, the iteration of her being that shattered her own conditioning. It was her fingers that shook on his gold card as she made the call that altered everything. She discovered a life on the verge of being snuffed out and pulled it back from the precipice. In that singular, spontaneous act, the unmoored vessel of her soul at last found its harbor. It was not chance. It was not arbitrary. It was the unavoidable rising of the woman Emma Turner was always destined to become, once the walls she had constructed around her heart had finally crumbled to dust.
Life lesson: the most painful betrayal is not fake love, it is real love trapped inside a broken system. The easiest way to misunderstand this story is to treat it like a simple mafia drama about danger, loyalty, and a hidden traitor. That is the surface. But the emotional engine underneath is much nastier. The real wound is not that betrayal exists. The real wound is that love exists too, and somehow it still is not enough to keep people from damaging each other. Ethan wakes in the alley terrified not merely because he is bleeding, but because Emma called the one person who can both save him and complicate everything, his father. That reaction tells the audience almost everything. Vincent is not just a rescuer. He is also structure, consequence, expectation, history. Ethan does not fear the absence of of love. He fears the cost of receiving love inside a world shaped by power. Then Vincent arrives and the story twists the knife further. For one tiny second, his face reveals real paternal panic. Not performance, not calculation, real fear. And that is exactly why the story hurts. If he were only cold, he would be easier to judge. If Ethan were only rebellious, he would be easier to understand, but neither is true. They care deeply. The problem is that Care has been forced to live inside a machine built from secrecy, masculinity, hierarchy, and emotional control. That is lesson 1. Genuine love can still become dangerous when it has no healthy structure to live inside. Emma's role makes the story sharper because she enters without belonging to that machine. She sees the Sullivan world the way an audience wants to see it before familiarity dulls the edges. She is not impressed by status in the way its insiders are. She is frightened, yes, but she still notices. She notices that Ethan's fear is different from physical pain. She notices Vincent's silence as a form of pressure. She notices the dangerous politeness of men who never raise their voices because they do not need to, and because she notices, she becomes the story's quiet weapon. The brilliant irony is that everyone is prepared for violence, but very few people are prepared for clarity. Emma is powerful because she is underestimated. She has spent her life in the social category that powerful people routinely overlook: useful, respectable, forgettable. The story weaponizes that invisibility. The family's enemies do not know what to make of her. The family itself cannot fully categorize her. She is too ordinary to fit their threat models and too perceptive to remain harmless. That is lesson 2. Being underestimated is painful, but once a person learns how to use it, it becomes a terrifying advantage. The tragedy is that this advantage is born from years of not being seen. When Emma later admits that playing into Dom's assumptions cost her something, the story makes an important correction. Invisibility may be useful, but it is never free. The father-son dynamic drives the deepest emotional lesson. Ethan hides suspicion because he knows his father will resist the implications. Vincent resists because he needs certainty before he can let himself reevaluate the structure around him. Both positions are understandable. Both are destructive. Ethan wants to prove he can act without permission. Vincent wants to believe his control still protects the family. Their conflict is not just strategic, it is developmental. It is a son trying to become separate without becoming disloyal, and a father trying to protect without admitting that the form of his protection may be part of the problem. When Ethan finally says he made a move because he knew Vincent would say no, the entire relationship explains itself. That line is not about business. It is about years of emotional architecture. It is about how authority can become so large that honesty begins to feel like surrender. This is what makes the later suspicion of betrayal by an insider so devastating. The traitor matters, yes, but the story suggests that the family was already vulnerable because truth had become too heavy to circulate cleanly. That is lesson 3. Systems do not collapse only because bad people enter them. They collapse because too many necessary truths were never safe to speak aloud in the first place. The ending matters because it refuses easy cynicism. Emma does not leave untouched. Vincent does not become innocent. Ethan does not transform overnight into emotional transparency. Nothing that easy happens, and yet the story still makes room for something deeply human. A seat saved at a diner next Thursday. That small possibility is not sentimental. It is revolutionary in the context of the story. After black cars, coded warnings, family lies, and the exposure of internal rot, what remains is not domination. It is not a transaction. It is not even a promise of safety. It is the possibility of tenderness that has not been fully poisoned by everything around it. That is why the story lands, not because evil is defeated, but because humanity survives contact with evil and does not disappear. Emma stays herself. Ethan, in small but meaningful ways, begins to step outside the emotional armor he inherited. Vincent learns to speak gratitude without hiding behind command. None of this erases the darkness, but it proves the final lesson. The most rebellious act in a broken world is not merely survival, it is remaining capable of clear seeing, moral choice, and tenderness after survival. Emma stops in the alley. She stays. She becomes a threat because she refuses confusion, and in the end, she does not become cynical. She becomes more fully herself. That is why the story works. The biggest plot twist is not the betrayal inside the family, it is the discovery that the woman everyone could have dismissed as ordinary was the only person who walked through darkness without letting darkness rewrite her.